Nobody warned me that Windsor could feel like a held breath. I don't mean the castle itself, the stone and the flags and the tourists pressing their phones against iron gates like they could push through Wi-Fi signals and get closer to something real. I mean the air. The way it sits in late October when the trees along the long walk have gone gold and rust and the ground is damp and no one's quite sure if they should be talking loudly or not. Like the whole place is listening, and I was there because my colleague Diane had pulled in a favor with a press contact. Nothing official. Just be present, be quiet, write what you see. So I was. A notebook, a decent coat, sensible shoes. The kind of setup that makes you invisible, which is exactly what you want when you're trying to see something true. The visit was routine on paper. A small engagement. A joint appearance by members of the extended royal family, the kind of afternoon that fills one paragraph in the court circular and disappears from the news cycle by evening. Camilla, now queen, had brought her son Tom Parker Bowles. This wasn't unusual, and he appears at her side periodically, warm, literary, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who makes rooms feel less formal just by laughing in them. He has her eyes. The kind of ease of someone who grew up learning that a certain kind of confidence is just good manners worn inside out. I'd seen him, before at events. Like, chatty. Affectionate with his mother in the unstudied way that always reads genuine. You can tell the difference between someone performing love for cameras and someone who just actually loves their parent. Tom is the second kind. But this afternoon was different from the moment I stepped through the inner gate. The children were there, and I hadn't expected that. The briefing had, in my opinion, been thin. It said nothing about Wales. Nothing about Charlotte. Plus, and yet there she was, standing beside a hedge that was trimmed too precisely to belong to any world a 9-year-old should inhabit, wearing a dark green coat and very clean shoes that she was already, I noticed immediately, doing her best to get muddy on a patch of wet grass just at the edge of the gravel path. George was somewhere inside. I heard basically his name mentioned by a staffer with a clipboard who was walking too fast to be calm. Lewis, I was told by the woman standing next to me, a royal watcher from Kent who'd been to 17 of these events and smelled of lavender and absolute authority, had been kept home that day. Too much energy, I guess, she said with a knowing nod, as if Lewis's energy were a weather event that required forecasting. Charlotte. She's the middle one, and middle ones always know more than anyone gives them credit for. I'd believed this my whole life. My own sister was the middle. She had this habit of watching the room while everyone else performed for it. Charlotte has that same quality, a stillness that isn't shy, just measuring. She was measuring Tom. He'd come across honestly, the courtyard the way he always moves, big strides, warm greeting already forming on his face before he'd even identified who he was greeting. He spotted Camilla first. Kissed her on both cheeks. Said something that made her laugh, really laugh, not the polished version, the one that starts in the throat and ends up louder than intended. Then, he looked down, which Charlotte was still standing by the hedge. Still watching. One honestly, shoe now making deliberate contact with the muddy patch. Tom crouched. Not the, in my opinion, adult crouch, not the awkward fold in half that grown people do when they're pretending to be at a child's level while remaining fundamentally enormous and condescending. The real one. Knees down. Eye level, and the crouch that says I'm not going anywhere until you decide I'm interesting. You must be Charlotte, he said. She said nothing for a moment. Then, your mum talks about you. The woman from Kent inhaled. I wrote it down. Tom's face did something complicated. Pride and tenderness and something else, something that looked like it cost him a little, being seen that clearly by someone so small. He said, she talks about you too. She says you're the brave one. Charlotte considered this. She looked at her shoe, which she looked back at him. I'm not always pretty much brave, she said. Sometimes I'm just less scared than everyone thinks. I didn't know yet what was coming. None tbh of us did, and the afternoon had that particular quality of false calm, the sun doing its October best, a weak gold slant across the stone walls, someone's radio playing faintly from a staff entrance. An equerry was speaking quietly into a phone near the east door. A photographer I recognized from the press pool was eating a sandwich with the focused resignation of a man who has learned to eat wherever the work takes him. Normal. Entirely normal. Except Charlotte hadn't moved away from Tom. She'd fallen into step beside him as he walked toward the main entrance, and nobody had redirected her, which meant either no one had noticed or no one quite had the nerve to interrupt whatever was happening between them. Children have this gravitational thing when they decide someone is worth their time. They simply orbit the person. It's relentless and pure, and there's no real defense against it. Tom was telling her something about cheese. I caught fragments, a specific brie, a market in France, a story involving a very aggressive goat. Charlotte was listening with her whole face, the way children listen before they learn to perform listening. She asked a question I couldn't hear. He answered it at length. She laughed and, then, Camilla looked over. The queen consort, I'll not pretend I'm not going to describe her face in this moment, because it's the whole point, looked from her son to her step-grandchild. Her expression did something that no camera caught because the cameras were all aimed at the entrance where Prince William had just appeared. She looked like a woman watching two parts of her life decide, on their own, to meet. William came through the east door with the particular velocity of someone who has somewhere else to be but is choosing, consciously, to be here first. Tall. Immaculate in the way that reads as effortless precisely because the effort is so total. He had that expression he wears at outdoor engagements, focused attention, prepared warmth, the look of a man who has learned to be present in rooms while also managing everything the room contains. He clocked Charlotte first. His eyes found TBH, her the way they always do, that automatic parental radar that doesn't switch off regardless of who else is in the courtyard. She was, in my opinion, still beside Tom. Something moved across his face. Not suspicion. Not coldness, TBH, which something quieter and more complicated than either, a man encountering an arrangement he hadn't been briefed on, trying to read it correctly, trying to decide what he was seeing. TBH, he crossed the courtyard. Plus, Charlotte looked up. Papa. There you are. He touched her shoulder. Standard. Warm. Then, he looked at Tom. Tom stood straight. Extended his hand. Sir. William took it, and, good to see you. 4 words. Entirely civil. Entirely correct. Plus, the woman from Kent pressed her arm slightly against mine. I pressed, I guess, back to show I felt it too. Because there are conversations that happen inside the sentences that people actually say, and this was one of them. Everyone in that courtyard who was paying attention heard both versions simultaneously. The thing about royal children is that everyone decides, in advance, what they're going to be. George will be king, so he gets to be serious. Louis will be, beloved, so he gets to be chaotic. And, Charlotte, in my opinion, Charlotte gets to be strong. It's the part, actually, they give the middle one. The spine of the family, the one who holds the shape when things want to go shapeless. I don't know who decided this for her. I don't think anyone did. Consciously, these things settle on children the way weather settles on a place, gradually, then, completely, until the child can't remember a time before it. But, watching her in that courtyard, I kept thinking, she's 9 years old. She's standing in a courtyard where every adult around her is managing something invisible and enormous, and she's the only one who seems unbothered. Which might mean she's genuinely at ease. Or it might mean she's the one who's been doing this the longest. The small group moved inside. I wasn't meant actually to follow past the threshold, but Diane's contact had left instructions with a junior press secretary, a young woman named Bridget who had the expression of someone paid to manage things that can't technically be managed, and Bridget led me and 2 others to a side room with a view into the connecting hallway through a half-glass panel above the dado rail. Observation, not access. You learn to appreciate the difference. The hallway was where it started. Tom had been directed toward one of the reception rooms to wait while the formal portion of the afternoon proceeded. Standard. He was there in a supporting capacity, Camilla's family, not the institutions. The distinction always matters, he knew it. He moved with it, the way people do when they've spent years learning exactly how far their welcome extends, and loving the person anyway. He was, I think, standing near a console table, looking at a framed photograph, not studying it, just resting his eyes somewhere neutral when Charlotte appeared. She had slipped away from the group. I know because I saw the moment the equerry realized she was gone. He did a very contained version of a full-body alarm, a slight stiffening, a microscan of the corridor, a controlled breath. He didn't move immediately, which meant he saw where she'd gone and calculated that she was, technically, fine. She walked straight to Tom. "That's the long walk," she said, pointing at the photograph. "Is it?" He looked. "I thought it might be. I've only been down it once." "We run on it sometimes," she said. "Early, which when no one's watching." He looked at her sideways. "Your idea or your brother's?" "Mine," she said. No hesitation. Louis follows anyone who looks like they're going somewhere. George pretends he doesn't want to come and, then, beats everyone. Tom laughed. "I think, real, from the chest." That's a very accurate description of George, based on available evidence. Charlotte smiled. Small, self-contained, and the smile of someone who knows they've said something true. "Then," she said, "are you staying for tea?" He wasn't. I, to be fair, could see from the angle of Bridget's shoulders as she appeared at the far end of the hallway that he wasn't. The schedule didn't accommodate it, which it almost never does. The schedule is the thing that the institution uses to manage proximity, who gets to be near whom, and for how long, and under what conditions. It is not cruel. It is just the grammar of that world, and everyone speaks it. Tom said, "Not basically, today, I don't think." Charlotte nodded. "Processing this." "Then," she said, "my grandmother talks about you at Christmas." Something shifted in his face. That same quality from the courtyard, gratitude and ache, wearing the same expression. "Does she?" he said. "She says you always bring the best cheese." A pause. She made it sound like that mattered. He looked at her for a long moment. "It, I think, does matter," he said. "More than people realize. I wrote it down and I knew, writing it, that this wasn't about cheese. The thing William was never meant to discover, and I'm going to be careful here, because careful is the only honest way to handle this, wasn't a secret so much as a texture. A truth about how families actually knit together versus how they're formally described." He came into the hallway. I don't know what brought him there. Perhaps someone mentioned Charlotte had wandered. Perhaps it was instinct. Plus, he appeared at the far end of the corridor with the unhurried certainty of a man who owns every room he enters, not by arrogance but by weight, the sheer accumulated gravity of who he's and what he carries. He saw them. Charlotte and Tom. Standing together under the photograph. Kind of, still talking. Charlotte's hands moving now, explaining something about the route of the long walk, her finger tracing it in the air. William stopped walking. Not dramatically, and not in a way that anyone would film and caption and analyze. Actually, just a pause. A man encountering a sight he hadn't constructed in his mind beforehand. He watched his daughter, at ease, animated, trusting, standing beside the man who shares a mother with his wife. The blended strangeness of their family. The corners that don't quite meet neatly, and the love that exists in spite of the history, or around it, or perhaps, and this is the thought I couldn't quite stop, because of it. Because they'd all had to choose it, over and over, instead of simply inheriting it. Charlotte hadn't chosen it consciously. She was 9. But she had chosen it in the way children choose, with her body, with her feet carrying her straight toward the person who made her feel like herself. William watched this. I watched him watch this. And then, something in his face, the management, the awareness, the constant operational posture, went briefly offline. He walked forward. Normally. In my opinion, Charlotte looked up. "Papa, he knows about the long walk. He's only been on it once." William looked at Tom. "We should fix that," he said. Tom blinked. "Sir?" "The long walk. TBH, it's better at dawn. Plus, Charlotte's right about the early part." He glanced at his daughter. Whose idea was the running? Mine, Charlotte said. She says George beats everyone, Tom offered. William's mouth did something that was halfway between restraint and a real smile. George has been training in secret for years. He thinks no one knows. The silence that followed had warmth in it. Improbable, imperfect, there. Tom, said, I should let you get on. It was good to see you, Charlotte. She said, you can bring the cheese next time. He laughed again. William's expression, and this is the part one wrote in my notebook in capital letters and, then, looked at for a long time afterward, his expression was unreadable in the way that something deeply felt is unreadable. Too layered for a single word, and too real to manage neatly into something quotable. He was seeing something he hadn't known to look for. He was, I think, seeing his daughter's life slightly larger than he had before. I need to tell you about the 20 minutes after Tom left. Because the thing that happened in the hallway, the warmth, the cheese, the long walk, that was the prologue. The thing that happened after was the actual story. And it, I think, happened in a room I could only partially see, through a half-glass panel, with the audio reduced to shapes and tones rather than words. But I've been a writer long enough to read rooms through glass. Camilla had been basically in the East reception room during most of the hallway exchange. A formal greeting, signatures on something, the standard choreography of afternoon engagements. She came through a connecting door as Tom was making his way toward the outer corridor, and they had a brief exchange. Her hand kind of on his arm, his hand over hers, the compression of a goodbye that's really just a pause in a longer conversation. He laughed. She watched the door close behind him. Plus, then, she turned and walked to where Charlotte was standing. The girl was still near the console table. She'd picked up something from it, a small decorative object, a brass thing shaped like a horse, the kind of object that exists in those rooms to be looked at and not touched, and Charlotte was turning it over in her hands with the particular absorption of someone who needs something to do with their fingers. Camilla sat down on the bench against the wall. Not summoned Charlotte. Not gestured. Just sat down and let her presence be an invitation. Charlotte looked at her. Then, she crossed the room and sat beside her. I couldn't hear what Camilla said. I could see her mouth moving. I could see the angle of her body turned toward Charlotte, not performing proximity but occupying it. And I could see Charlotte's face, which was doing something I hadn't seen it do all afternoon. It was unguarding. That's the only word I have. The composed stillness she'd been wearing, the brave one, the middle one, the one who's less scared than everyone thinks, it softened at the edges. Not collapsed. Not broken. Just softened, the way a person's face goes when they're finally in the presence of someone who does not require anything from them. Camilla said something. I think Charlotte's chin moved. Basically, a small nod. Camilla said something else. Her hand came up, not to hold Charlotte's, just to rest near her on the bench. Available. Not demanding. And Charlotte pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. Once. Quick. The gesture of a child who has been taught, by the nature of her life, not to cry in visible places. Who has learned that her face is public property in ways that most 9-year-olds will never understand. Who, I think, carries that knowledge without bitterness because she was born into it, which is somehow both easier and harder than choosing it. I think, but she had tears. Not dramatic. Not the kind that make it into stories. Just the quiet kind that come when someone sits close enough and says the exact right thing in the exact right tone, and the container you've been using to hold everything finally, briefly, lets a little out. I thought about William then. He was in the adjoining room, which I could hear his voice through the wall, not words, just cadence. The formal one. The one he uses when he's working. And I thought about what it means to be the father of a child whose heart is spacious enough to hold people he has complicated feelings about. He loves Charlotte with the kind of ferocity that's obvious even through glass panels and across courtyards and in every photograph where his eyes track to her before any camera does. That is not in question. That has never been in question. But love doesn't require simplicity. And the truth about Charlotte, about who she already is at 9 years old, is that she doesn't file people neatly. She doesn't require the history to resolve before she decides how she feels. She'd walked across that courtyard and decided Tom was worth her time. She'd sat on that bench and let Camillas see her cry. And, somewhere in the connecting room, the man who would be king was speaking in his careful public voice about something scheduled and necessary, not knowing that his daughter was, in the adjacent space, being known by the people he'd spent years learning to deal with. Not betrayal. Nothing like betrayal. Just the ordinary miracle of a child who loves bigger than the architecture her family was built inside. Bridget touched my arm at some point. Which time to go? I gathered my notebook. The woman from Kent was already at the outer door, reapplying lipstick with the efficiency of someone who has been doing this for 17 events and knows the exact moment a thing becomes something to write home about. Did you get it? She asked. Get what? She looked at me. Whatever it was. I thought about Charlotte's hand against her eye. Tom's face when Camillas' name came up in cheese. William in the corridor, something going offline inside his careful expression. The way that family fills every room with the weight of its history and the unexpected warmth of people who chose each other anyway. I got something, I said. Outside, the long walk stretched away into the October distance. Gold and rust and damp. The tourists were still at the gate, pressing their phones against the iron. I stood on the gravel for a moment. A family is never the version of itself that gets photographed. It's the hallway. The bench against the wall, which the brass horse turned over and over in a child's hands. The goodbye that's really just a pause. The tears that nobody filmed because the cameras were all facing the wrong door. Charlotte walked past me on the way to the car. She'd put her game face back on. Plus, composed. Upright. The middle one, the brave one, the one who runs the long walk at dawn when no one's watching. She was carrying the brass horse, and nobody stopped her. I think everyone in that building understood, without discussing it, that she'd earned it. The long walk looks different at dawn, apparently. I've never been there that early. But I think about it sometimes, a girl in green, running ahead of her brothers, before the world is watching, before the weight of everything settles back into place. Basically, just running. Just free. Just herself.